Hello and welcome to another episode of Molten Truth. I am your host, Zoey Michaels. You can find information about me on zoeymichaels.com. Today, we are here to interview Lynda Williams. She is a writer who aspired to be a writer even from a very young age. And after a few bumps in the road, she made it, and she made it in a way that is amazing. You will love to hear her story and about her latest book, which is coming out in September. But I'm going to let her give you those details because we are just a platform, like a golden band, and she is our diamond who's just going to shine for us. So Lynda, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me, Zoe. So I'm excited to share that I have a book coming out on September 1st. It's called The Beauty and the Hell of It and Other Stories. We're not focusing so great on here, but that's okay. It's a collection about women and the messy lives of women who color outside the lines. These are women who are dealing with grief, trauma, mental illness, and they're just struggling to get by. Sadly, it's not unusual stuff they're dealing with, it's the ordinary stuff. It's the struggle to make ends meet day to day, dealing with things like miscarriage, abortion, stillbirth, all these things that happen too often and are hard to get through, but are also part of what gives our lives meaning in the silver linings that happen around that too. I think there's some nice moments between characters where they just hold space for each other in that grief and pain. And those are my favorite moments in the book.
Absolutely. Now, if I remember one of our earlier conversations, these were taken from some true stories, right? These are not fiction. This is people you've interviewed.
Well, it's a combination of things that have happened to me that inspired the stories, things I've observed, things that have happened to friends. So, and that I took and fictionalized, right?
Mhm.
Because sometimes you get closer to the truth when you're making things up, right?
I
It,
do get that. Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. Or it even kind of raises questions that you would be otherwise afraid to explore. But in the fictional world, maybe we're a little bit braver.
Absolutely. I think often I write my alter egos. All of the women I write about are a little bit braver, a little bit louder, a little bit sassier than I do present in real life. And yeah, I think that's a quality I admire in the characters I write.
Absolutely. I had a similar experience because I gravitate toward fiction. That's my that's my jam, for lack of a better way to put it. But the book that I put out, the one that started me on the road to being a guest on podcasts and then creating this podcast platform, was ultimately it was a nonfiction book that I published, but it started out. I actually wrote a completely different book first, and it was fiction. And after I finished it, I said, it's a good story, maybe for later, but it's not really what I want to put out. I want to create something that's actually going to make people think and have a tool and a resource. So I said, okay, shelf, book number 2 of the same subject. And here we are. So, but that sometimes the fiction world is what gets you there.
It's interesting the process we go through in writing a book, right? Like sometimes there is a book before it that's the genesis of the next book, right? And
Exactly.
yeah, I think that happens. Even if I think about some of the stories that didn't make it into the book, they were all like scales on the piano, getting me ready for what would be included in the book, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting the way our minds work. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I wish I'd gone to school to learn like some psychology and some of that, because I look at some of the choices I've made or others have made or how we got there, and I just would like, I wish I knew more about the mind.
Yeah, I hear you, right? It's the elective I never took, basically. And now I look back and I'm like, why? It would have been so easy just to take one.
Right? Well, I guess it's never too late, or so they tell me.
Yes, I've heard that too.
Yeah. But talk to me. You mentioned that about classes and electives, and I believe that was part of your journey too, right? With becoming an author. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so basically, when I was a kid and I got birthday money, people asked what I would do with it, and I said, "Well, I'm saving it for college." It just went in the bank, and I knew I wanted to be a writer someday, and I just assumed that education would be part of that. And things went off the rails a little when I was a teenager, though. That's when I started my mental health journey, and by journey, I mean I got a diagnosis of bipolar disorder.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's
And
like expecting to go to Hawaii and ending up in, I don't know, a leper colony.
exactly, right? It was just not what I was expecting, and
Mhm.
it came at a point in my life where I wasn't prepared to deal with something for the rest of my life, because it's not something you get over. It's not chronic, or it's chronic rather, not acute. And up to that point in my life, anything that involved illness or injury had always been acute. So it was a short window, very painful, like your wisdom teeth coming out, but it
Right.
was over. It ended. And I didn't know how to make sense of this thing that wasn't going to go away. So I did what lots of people at that age do, and I ignored it, much to my detriment. And that worked for a few years. I mean, I say worked, but I was able to
Denial.
keep
Gotta love
doing
it.
it for a few years. And
Mhm.
luckily, I did get into university. And that's where I found this lovely family doctor who finally got me back to a psychiatrist and on some stable medication. So I could actually take classes in university and not drop them and juggle work and life and be more of an adult um, in the way that you need to be if you're going to accomplish anything. But that was just the
Absolutely.
beginning. I took 3 years of university, and then I decided that I could somehow carve out my career in retail, which is what I've been doing as an assistant manager, just because when you're 20, you think that'll get me by. That's enough. I don't need much, right? We don't
It's
need
so
money,
true.
or
You
we
do
don't
your math. I can live off $1,000 a month or less or whatever. Yeah.
exactly. I always want to live with roommates, right? So I did go back to school in my mid 20s, and I knew I needed a credential that I could use. So I took professional writing. And that's something that informed the way I write now. I like compression very much. I don't like to write flowery purple prose, I guess you would say.
Yeah.
Um, and I think there's a place for that though. Like if you think about Faulkner, right? I mean, could he have operated another way? No. I mean, he he wasn't trying to be Hemingway, and he did something beautiful in his own style. But my style is not that style, is what I learned.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's important to have a distinct voice. We're
Mhm.
not there to imitate someone else. I mean, it's not that's plagiarism, right? So we are there to be our authentic self with our authentic story and voice. You know, we
Absolutely.
might have something in common with another writer, but we are still telling something that's uniquely us.
Yes. And I think coming up against all those writers I was doing an undergrad in English literature, did give me a better sense of what I wanted my own voice to sound like. I know there can be times when people say, oh, when I'm writing, I don't read anyone else because I don't want them to infiltrate my voice or
Right.
come out that way. And I don't subscribe to that. I really think read as much, as widely as you can. I mean, I don't care if you're reading pulpy stuff or high literature. It's take it all in, and it's going to contribute to the shape of your voice. It'll just be like finely sanding those edges because you have a core voice, and I think it comes out in response to those other voices.
And I can see that. You know, for me, writing books and writing music to me feed off. It's all part of the same creative ecosystem in my head. So
Mhm.
as I hear you talking about that, generally speaking, I'm more of a, I don't want to read anyone else's while I'm working on my stuff. I'm of that class. But I see your point of view, and my mind goes to music writers who, one artist might write a song, and it's almost like another artist is answering them with the way they
Yeah.
wrote their song. And so maybe there's that element of you're reading someone else's work, and as you're thinking about it, like, well, but I don't necessarily agree with this point you made, so I'm going to answer in this way to continue the conversation.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I remember something an editor, I was listening to this panel of writing professionals, agents, and editors talking about the submission process and what you can do to stand out. And he was talking about the importance of knowing a publishing house's backlist because you wanted to be able to speak to how you're in conversation with their other authors. And I think we're really in conversation with all the writing that we're reading. But if you are trying to be published professionally, yes, do know that backlist because you want to be in conversation with those other authors in some way.
Absolutely. And in a way, I think it's almost unavoidable because, as you know, when we write a story, we look at it and we go, I'm happy with it. It's perfect. Don't touch it. The reality is, it needs those beta readers, it needs those editors to really polish it to a shine, despite what we might feel like inside. My baby, you know?
Yeah, and I find there's like I don't know what you would say, a shelf life to that honeymoon period where if you
Mhm.
put it in a drawer long enough, you start to see some of the cracks yourself. But I much prefer not to wait. I'm always excited and grateful when there are people who are willing to give me that feedback
Mhm.
before I can necessarily see, you know,
Mhm.
those little fissures and cracks myself.
Right, exactly. So, what my first book, I didn't have the knowledge base that I have now. So I jumped in with feet first, no editor, no beta reads. I just jumped. And then
Wow.
I learned that, okay, yep, I found errors myself and some friends found errors. Let me fix these. Another friend's like, it's a good story, but could you explain this? How did you jump from this to this? Maybe you need to add another chapter. So having that feedback, like I said, I learned the hard way. I just thought, okay, I'm going to write a book, I'm going to self publish, and there it is. Let's go. So I did things kind of backwards.
Yeah, and I think we all do that at some point along the way where I know for me it was getting published in literary magazines was my big goal when I was in my 20s, and it was a code I couldn't seem to crack. I came to writing through poetry. I had submitted so many poems as a high school student, and then I finally got one when I was in 19 years old, so just almost done with being a teenager. Um, in this magazine that was, properly bound, not stapled together. And I was so proud of that. And then I fell out of love with poetry and moved on to fiction. And I thought somehow because I had achieved this literary journal dream, I could move swiftly or deftly from one category to the other. And that's not quite the way it went. That's not the way it went at all. It took almost a decade to get that next publishing credit.
Yeah, it is. It's an interesting journey. And, you know, you talked about wanting to be a writer from childhood. I'm curious because I'm looking at my own life going, okay, there were hints in my life that I should be a writer, but no one ever caught it. Even I never caught it, even though I would write letters to myself to explain things to myself, or I would write letters to people before I would even talk to them because verbal is not really my happy place.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you. I
you
second
know?
that.
Yeah. So it took me a long time to really realize, why am I beating my head against the wall doing this when what I love is to write? And so looking back at my family history, you mentioned poetry. My great aunt was a poet, and she was not just a poet, she was published. She was the editor of a book of poetry that she put together, a honest to goodness real book that I went and finally bought a couple months back. I'm like, let me read my aunt's poetry. But I wonder, with that in mind, do you have maybe some family or friend influences that kind of help shape that desire for you early in life?
Absolutely. And for me, one of my earliest memories is my mother drawing the shades on a really hot summer afternoon. And you have to know, like, we lived in a 100-year-old farmhouse. It was so terrible. All these windows, these huge windows to let the light in, which was lovely, but also very hot in the summer. So, we'd gather around her and she would read to us. I remember her reading Heidi when I was 3, Nancy Drew when I was 5. There was another collection that was very Nancy Drew-like that was called Cherry Ames, Student Nurse, and she was an army nurse. I think it was during the Korean War in the 50s, but it was all just mysteries and very light. But that really lit the fire in me as a reader. And I think often reading comes first for writers. And then I went to school and I grew up in Quebec, right? So English speaking family, but going to school at a French institution was kind of just taken for granted if you're going to get by, right? So I went to school and I learned to read and write in French.
I'm sorry. I'm just like envious of you. That just sounds so great to me that you would have dual languages. And I've always loved the French language, just the sound of it. What can I say? I'm a romantic. But anyway, please continue.
Absolutely. No, it was wonderful, I think, and much easier to learn at that age. It slowed me down a little bit, though. So when I got to be in 5th grade, I did transfer to an English school. And in order to get me ready for that, my mother bought me a bunch of books because I'd never properly learned to read in English. And I was 10 years old, right? So I was about due, and she got me Lucy Maud Montgomery's Anne of Green Gables
I
collection.
love that. Oh, that's so great.
It was delightful. And I mean, I did all right. I was thrown by all the words that ended in like GHT. We don't think about that in English, but if you don't know how to make that sound,
True.
it's a very peculiar word,
Yes,
thought.
it is. Yeah, because I mean, yeah, those letters just don't go together. Not really.
Not in French, that's for sure. But I learned through her books. I read all of them, just devoured them. And that's when I really knew I want to be a writer. This is what I want to do. And yeah, from there, I just started writing short stories. The big difference between language programs at the French school and the English one was in French, you're learning grammar, you're learning verbs, you're studying that, and it's all very dry. In English, because you've stolen from so many languages
It is
and
a mongrel tongue. It's so true.
absolutely, you're not really rehearsing verbs or learning grammar rules. You have some of that, right? I mean, you're learning a little, but you're also doing creative writing. I'd never had a creative writing class before. So in 5th grade, I was just set free to be a writer for the first time. And I could barely spell. I was still learning to read, but boy, did it make me happy.
Yeah, I do have to say I relate to that. The creative writing pieces of my English. I have to be honest. I did not enjoy English class except for the ability to read and the ability to write. Breaking down like the grammar part, trying to this is a direct object, this is a verb, this is a noun. I was horrible at figuring out what was what. I mean, could I tell a noun from a verb? Absolutely. Beyond that, I was hopeless. And I'm like, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
Let me read. Let me write. I'm happy to do either one of those, but don't make me do grammar.
Same, same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What can I say? But also, like you, even though I was born and raised here, this is my native tongue. When I go back, it's funny to me because I have always loved to read as far back as I can remember. But when I look back at like my original report cards from like kindergarten, the teacher told my parents, you need to read to her because she is struggling. And so some of my happiest memories are a result of that teacher's report card because my dad took it seriously. And so I have these specific memories of my dad pulling out, we had this book of Bible stories. That was what he chose as that, which was made for our, the very young kids in the house. And I had two little brothers. And so, my dad would read to us from that, but he would always ask us also to maybe choose a favorite. And my brothers loved this one specific story, Jonah and the Big Fish. They
Oh,
they would make my dad read that almost every single time. And I didn't mind. I liked the story myself, but I had that story memorized because we read it so often. And because I memorized it and I recognized the small words and how to sound things, that was when I picked up the reading. So it's funny to hear you talk about that because I'm like, boy, that brings back those memories for me.
yeah. Yeah, I remember stopping my mother very often. What does that word mean? What does that word mean? And it's a great thing if someone has the patience to read that way to you, right? Because it's
Yes,
not easy to be interrupted that often.
true. I think I would not maybe be that patient. I'd be like, I would recognize I would need to be, but I'd be like, write the story.
Exactly.
Listen to the story. Thank goodness for patient parents.
Yeah.
So I got us off track just because, you know, squirrels. But you it was during the pandemic then that you finally sat down to write the first book, or am I mistaken with that?
No, that is absolutely correct. After all the time I spent submitting to journals in my 20s and only getting that one publication credit, I actually set the writing aside, put this stack of stories I had in a drawer, didn't look at them again until the pandemic. And the reason for that was in my doom scrolling, because I didn't really know how to like digest everything that was happening to me. And
Mm-hmm.
so between Netflix and doom scrolling, I saw on social media posts from different people, some people I followed, some people I didn't know who they were, sharing that they'd written books in the period since the pandemic had started, or that they had written books and they were also getting published. And I thought, hey, you want to be a writer, why aren't you doing something about this? And so, to give myself the proper kick in the pants I needed, I applied to a mentorship program
I was
at
going to
Humber.
ask about that. So glad that you brought that up. By all means, please continue.
Yeah, it's a place called Humber Polytechnic in Toronto, and it's a correspondence program, so totally remote, perfect for those times. I didn't really want to move across the country at that point in my life, and I was, lo and behold, accepted to this program. And I spent the next 2 years refining and writing the stories that are in the collection.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember when we spoke that you said that that was really a game changer, and that you were very much in favor of people embracing mentorship, both being mentor and being mentored. Um,
Yes.
do you want to expand on that any or?
Absolutely. For me, the big game changer wasn't necessarily in terms of craft, because I had taken some courses in creative writing and I had read all the books you're supposed to read on craft. And I had practiced quite a bit too, but I felt I had hit a ceiling. Like I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know how to bring the revisions that were needed to get me to the next step of getting published in literary journals so that it could be taken seriously by publishers for a collection of the stories. So when
Right.
you're writing a novel, it's one thing not to have publishing credits. It always looks good to have them for sure. But if you're writing short stories and you don't have the publishing credits, nobody's taking you seriously. So I needed to somehow get over that hurdle, and that's where the mentorship really came in. my mentor was also like my rejection doula or my rejection coach, I would say. Now, when I get a rejection, I just think, okay, this is confirmation that I'm a writer. But that comes from the time I spent with her teaching me that it's the second best answer you can get. There is such a thing as a silent rejection where you just never hear back. That's the
That's
worst
true.
answer you can
Yeah,
get. Of
it's true
course,
because it leaves you wondering and hoping. Yeah, it's like someone ghosting you.
yeah. Yeah. So working through that fear of rejection, I set myself a rejection goal. I decided, I'm going to rack these up. I'm going to look forward to it. I'm going to embrace it. So, yeah, I started mass sending out things unsubmittable because I had a very old fashioned mentality about sharing my work with literary journals. When I was writing poetry, back in the mid 90s, you mailed your submission, you sent it with that envelope with your self-return address on it and told them to recycle the manuscript, and you waited. And it was exclusive. That was understood that nobody else was looking at this. And at some point that changed with Submittable and, online platforms. And I wasn't up to date with the times. I still thought, no, I'm submitting to this magazine and they get their time with it. It's like I'm cheating on them if I send it to someone else. And if you think about the 6, 8, 9 months you might wait to get an
Yeah,
answer.
might be years before you finally get published, and
Yeah,
maybe the story is no longer relevant.
exactly. So, yeah, I got over that fear of sending it out to multiple people. I got over the fear of hearing no because you hear no a lot more often when you send out more often.
Sure,
And eventually I got some yeses.
which
Yeah.
is like music to your ears.
Yeah.
And really, when you think about it in terms of just how the world works in general, I mean, it's like people who have sales goals. They have to go through 100 no's before they get that one yes. So basically, it's the same thing. We're trying to sell our story to some publisher that is going to be like, okay, yes, we want this, but you have to go through all those no's, those rejections first. And I have to admit, I mean, even though I know that, I don't think I really thought about it until you brought that up.
Yeah, and it was something I mean, I feel like I should have been able to figure that out on my own, but it really did actually take someone else to say, "No, this is the industry. I've been in it for years. I still hear no all the time, even though I've written this many books. This is how it works," right?
Absolutely. I think we all need sometimes it's someone to tell us the obvious, if nothing else, because maybe we don't want to admit it to ourselves yet of that possibility. But sometimes the thing's right in front of your face is the thing you can't see.
Exactly. Yeah.
Let me see here. Now, let's talk a little bit more about you had it so mentioned something about an inspiration. I think Lauren Moore was the name you threw out. Tell me about
Oh,
that.
Lori Moore, yes. Self-help. I don't know if you've read that collection.
I
It's
have not.
boy, it's from the '80s, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, it goes back a ways, and I think it was her first collection, and
Okay.
it was all second person stories, and it was something that really it shaped one story in particular in the collection, which was written in second person. And it was what I call my revenge tour story because at that point in my life, I was just coming out of an abusive relationship and I had been assaulted by my partner. And it changed writing for me in the sense that I was in a writing program at that point in my 20s, the professional writing program, but I could no longer write. So I left the program, but I stayed committed to writing every weekend, went to the coffee shop, did my thing, sat down, and I would just write the same sentence over and over because that's the trick when you're doing free fall writing. You don't know what to say. You just keep writing that sentence until something comes. The problem was nothing was coming.
Hmm.
And that lasted for, I would say, September to May.
That's a
Yeah.
long time.
That is a very long time for a writer not to write. And in May, something clicked that I could actually use the second person to write this story of what had happened to me, because obviously that was a story that was trying to come out that I, for some reason, couldn't speak.
Right.
I say for some reason, but I think the reason's kind of obvious also.
I would say. Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, admitting it to yourself. Up until then, you had not been able to admit it to yourself. So then you found another way.
Yeah. And that way around the block was second person. And at that point, I know I had read one of Lori Moore's stories from the collection, and it was called How to Be a Writer. And I do recall the first line of that is first do anything else or first try anything else, one of those, which had basically had been my approach. But it was a hilarious story and it really did second person well. So I thought maybe, just maybe, I can try this little way of tricking myself into unloading all this terrible stuff that has happened so I can move on with life.
Yeah. Well, and evidently it worked. So
Yeah,
you got some good advice from her book. So
absolutely.
that's a wonderful thing. When I think without knowing the person, but I would assume, like you or I, if someone could gain value from something you or I wrote that helped them in their life, we would be thrilled. We would love to know it. So I would imagine if she was here today, she would just be extremely gratified to hear that she was able to help you in that way.
I hope so. Yeah. Yeah, I know that's definitely one of the reasons I do write. I just hope that, it resonates with someone, that it lands, and you don't know what effect that will have, right?
Exactly. I mean, we always hope, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah, every book has, even if it's a fictional light piece, something in there you hope will speak to someone on some level and help them in something in their life. And even if it's for entertainment, there's always more than just the entertainment. There's always a piece of you in there that you hope resonates with someone and that they're able to use in a practical way in their life. At least I find that in my case. That's what I wish for people when they read my books.
Absolutely. And I think we often say, just for entertainment, but when I think about some of the most difficult times in my life, the books I turned to were often the just for entertainment ones because I couldn't deal with what was in front of me, and the possibility of escaping somewhere was such a comforting thing, right? So I've actually got like a couple Harlequin romances that I have reread. I know they aren't books that
I
are
know.
meant to
I
be
haven't
read.
thought about those since I was a teenager, but I used to love reading those.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, that you found them helpful.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I've got a note and I'm trying to remember why I have this note, but I have something written down about miles to inches, and I'm trying to remember what that was about.
Now that is the story we're discussing, and that's the second person story. What I didn't finish on was the big validating moment of the revenge tour came in 2012. It was a couple years after I'd written it, and I decided I would submit it to a contest. And it's Room Magazine's fiction contest that they run on a yearly basis. It's a feminist magazine. I think it's the oldest feminist journal in Canada. Um, and it got the honorable mention for that year's contest. And that was just my, okay, you can move on. You have taken your sow's ear and made your silk purse. And yeah, that story, when I look at the collection, I don't think it's the strongest one in the collection. I think I might have been able to push it further if it wasn't so close to me.
Mhm.
But it's also one of my special babies.
Absolutely. I wonder if later in life, when it's a little less near, if it might not be an inspiration for a future book down the line, kind of a sketch compared to the work of art you'll create later.
That's actually a great way to look at it. Yeah, it could be the story leading to the next book.
Mhm. Absolutely. Because I do think even if we choose different genre, even if we choose a different setting, all of the stories interconnect in some way. There's some way that they influence each other, either in the choice or the character. There's usually a common element, kind of like water. Water's kind of an element everywhere in the world, right?
Yeah.
So just like our stories, again, going back to that creative ecosystem. So,
Mhm.
now let's see. I think my note here is about just you unlocking, so I'm gonna leave that alone. Um, so I know we had talked about maybe favorite sayings. I know that you had previously said that you have all kinds of advice for writers, but as far as for personal life, every man for himself, and nothing wrong with that at all. But tell us about maybe your favorite saying.
Okay, so yeah, I know, and it's a saying I invented. It's something I
Oh, don't think
basically
I
chant
realized.
to myself
Okay.
on bad mental health days. I tell myself that you can do some of your best work on your worst days. And I will say that this is in the creative realm. If you're, a school teacher, that could be different. But
We hope not, but definitely could be. Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. But for me, I know there's another story in this collection that placed in a contest, and it was it wasn't a bad mental health day. It was I'm feeling physically ill day when I wrote this, and I was basically writing the story, but also looking up every 5 to 10 minutes and saying, don't puke," and then just keep going. And turned out to be an okay story, right? Like if I had spent the afternoon just being sick, well, I probably wouldn't remember that day. But it was also a blessing to have the relief from just thinking, "Oh, don't puke, don't puke," to
Yeah.
be able to focus on a story, right? And that's
Sure. Pleasant
yeah,
distraction to a yucky day.
yeah, yeah. So
Do you aim to write every single day, or what is your life look like as a writer?
I am not you must write every single day. And I'm not sure if that's like the mental health, neurospicy part of me that just can't hunker down to a routine. I go through periods where if I know I need to get things done, like when I was doing the mentorship program and I knew I need to have a story in by this date, I'll be up at 4:35 in the morning to hammer out the words as soon as I can get them over with, and it's like a relief. I can have my day back after that. But I'm also not someone who will say, "You have to have 1,500 words before you can leave your desk," because I think that might lead to arbitrary words that I would just be deleting the next day.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I'm also someone and this is something I don't recommend, but I have to be honest about how I operate. I edit as I go.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
not necessarily a bad thing. I don't think it is. Um, and I
Yeah, like
would think it would help further down the line just to simplify later. So personally, I'm in favor of it.
yeah. And for me, because I don't outline, looking back and trying to get the words right is also how I figure out what needs to happen next, because I
Yes.
don't have all that figured out, and I learned early on, I think I was 17 when I attempted to write a novel because, hey, why not? You think you wanna be a writer, the next Lucy Maud? Sure, you can write poetry and novels. Um, and I took the outlining advice seriously. I outlined every chapter. I got 140 pages in and realized I didn't care about the story anymore. I knew what was gonna happen, and the
Mhm.
thing that drives me to write stories is to discover what will happen.
Interesting. So you don't necessarily have the fully formed idea about where the story's going when you start out. It's really about the road how do you word that? Going out on a road and just seeing where you end up, I guess, is instead of having a destination on a map, for lack of a better way to phrase that.
Yeah, no, that's
it's about the journey. There it is. That's what I'm looking for. Not the destination.
Yeah.
But that's interesting because I feel like I take a kind of a different approach. I usually have a pretty good idea of where I want to end. I may not know how I'm getting there.
Okay.
I'll take little, tangents and side roads, but ultimately I know where I want to end up. But, that's the thing. Inner author voice and what we have in mind, and we all have our different ways that we work. So it's always interesting just to hear, I bet you could talk to 100 different authors and we all have a different system.
Mm-hmm. And I think because this is a collection of stories, if I think about how I approached each one, always a little bit different. There is one story in the collection where I knew where I wanted to end.
Okay.
And that was a very different process to write that one. I wrote the initial draft, and because I knew where I wanted to end, I basically raced towards that end, and the pacing was off. And that's not something I normally struggle with as much. I can usually, because I'm editing as I go and discovering as I go, it unfolds a little more naturally. But this one time, I know I got the feedback from my mentor, and she said, slow down. You've got to unpack this a little more because where you arrive is great. It's just the journey.
Interesting. And that's again where it's nice to have that outside feedback, because in our head it's perfect just the way it is, and maybe it's not as perfect as we think it is.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that story doubled in length.
Well, and some stories really just, they need that length of time to really be told well.
Absolutely.
No shorthand.
No.
So let's see. I think that was mainly the big questions. Now, I started doing something new since I spoke with you. And right now I only have one question to work with. So I'm asking all of the people I interview to come up with a question for someone else in the future. But for now, I'm going to work with what I have. So my question that I am taking from one of the people I interviewed, if I can find it in my notes, is how important is love when dealing with grief?
Oh, I think it's everything. Yeah. I think grief might be the thing that teaches you what true love is. When I think about the dedication to the book, it's for two people. It's a brother and a sister who I've known since my early 20s. And Heather, the sister, is still with us. Unfortunately, Sean is not. He died by suicide in 2010. Yeah. But that grief is something that changed our relationship for the better. It's something that I think transformed us from maybe being transitional friends, because you have a lot of those in your 20s where you're in a place and you're friends because of that shared place. And then maybe you move on to a different place in your life and you don't stay as close. But we live across the country from each other and we still are just as close, but also closer, I think, in a much more intimate way because of that shared grief. And it's also a recognition of just how to hold space for each other, because although we lost the same person, we're not grieving the same loss. I'm grieving my friend. She's grieving her only sibling, her younger brother. That's something else, right? Like it's something to go from having a sibling to not anymore, right? There's a shared memory bank is something we often talk about that she has with Sean, or she had, and no one else has those memories to share with her and relive anymore.
That's
And
so
that,
true.
yeah.
Yeah. I didn't mean to interrupt. But you said it so well. I'm so grateful. I come from a family with 5 kids.
Okay.
3 of us are extremely close.
Yeah.
But the loss of my dad is what actually drew my sister and I together. There's a 6-year age difference between us. So I was always the pesky little sister, go away. Even in my 30s, she was like, eh. But after we lost our dad, that changed the dynamic and we actually became close. So it's interesting how that grief can really affect us, and
Absolutely.
sometimes for the better. Hopefully,
Mhm.
always for the better, but at least sometimes.
Yes. Yeah, and I really hope that's one thing that comes through in the book, that grief can have positive outcomes as well. Like, I mean, the book is dark, but there's
Yeah,
also dark humor,
yeah,
and also I hope there's light shining through those cracks.
absolutely. That was one thing I had meant to talk about because it was interesting how you spoke of them as being anti-heroes.
Oh, yes. I can talk all day about women who don't get, I guess, the credit for being anti-heroes.
Yeah.
If you're a woman, in life or in literature, and you're a little bit messy and you're complicated, you're difficult, sometimes you're a bitch, sometimes you're crazy, you get dismissed, and it's not okay with me at
Yeah.
all, which is part of why I wanted to write characters who were difficult and messy and hard to pin down.
Yeah.
Because some of the feedback I got in, creative writing classes in undergrad was, "I liked the story, I didn't like her." And I
But she was integral to the story. You wouldn't have the story without your anti-hero.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I really didn't know what to make of that at first. It did throw me for a loop. I thought, maybe I'm doing something wrong. Is she supposed to be more likable? And ultimately, I decided, no, I'm going to lean into this. This is what I like. This is what I love to read. I just inhale male characters who are like this. So why shouldn't we have women who are like
Right.
this?
It's just going against the norm. And so they're just going to have to get used to it.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. And there's this thing in life as well as in literature called the loveliness imperative. I coined that term, so
I'm
that's
just
why
saying,
you've
I'm like, I've
never heard of
never
it.
heard that, but I like it.
But it is that thing where everything you do has to appeal to men.
Mm-hmm.
If
That's
you're going to
true.
disagree, do it softly. If you're going to sneeze, do it politely. It's
Mm-hmm.
everything that's exhausting.
Yeah, it
I'm
is.
sorry, but I can't. I don't have time for that. And men are not worrying about how they're coming across that way to women,
Not really.
right? Not
Yeah,
at all. So there's clearly no need for me to be doing this either. And if you object to me not subscribing to the loveliness imperative,
no.
that's for you to unpack, right? And
Mm,
that's where I arrived at with these characters that, nope, these are going to be women who are done caring about that sugar.
right. You know, I hear that you say this term that I've never heard before that you've coined, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I want to read a book with that title. So you know what? I need you to write a book now.
The next book, yes,
I do. That sounds so interesting to me as a subject to read. So I do hope that maybe you take that and run with it. Um,
absolutely. I might have to start with an essay, but
that's okay. Nothing wrong
yeah,
with that. But if you ever do, by all means, reach out. Let me know because
absolutely.
I might even want to be one of your beta readers. I want to read this as early as possible.
Heck
But
yes.
yeah. So guess we get ready to wrap up. I just kind of want to ask, where are people going to find the book that's coming out in September? Where are they going to find it?
Okay, so it's already available for pre-order. If you're in the States, Barnes& and Noble as well as Amazon.com. And then if you're in Canada, there's my publisher's website, which is guernicaeditions.com.
Okay.
And then as well as Amazon, Chapters Indigo, or your local independent. If you're in the UK, it's amazon.co.uk.
Okay.
I think, yeah, that's
That sounds
pretty
right.
much the state of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. I feel like there was another question I was going to ask, and I've clean forgot it already. But oh, go ahead. You've got a thought.
Was I supposed to leave a question behind for your next one?
Yes, I would love if you have one ready. By all means, let's hear it. And if not, message me. But if you have it, then let's rock and roll. What is the question?
Okay, I don't think I went as deep as the last person did, but I was thinking about what would you want your next tattoo to be? Or if you don't have a tattoo, what would you get if you were to get a tattoo? And tell us the story of the why.
Be and why? I like it. We will definitely ask that question. I appreciate that. So thank you, everyone, for joining us on the Molten Truth. Please, if you enjoyed having this interview and the other interviews we've done prior to this, please like our YouTube page, share it with your friends, tell other people, tell people about Lynda and her book, and thank you just for being with us.
Thank
And
you
thank
so
you,
much for
Lynda.
having me.
You're welcome. Glad to have you.
Bye.